You're listening to Break Your Ego, Find Your Soul with Ramsey Bergeron.
Today I interview Dr. Daron Merryman, an emergency room doctor from Little Rock, Arkansas, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for, over 30 years. We actually worked at Foot Locker together back when I was in high school, and he was pre-med back in the day, in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And we talk about how he's been dealing with all the COVID in the emergency room there in Little Rock, how he detaches from work, takes care of his 3 children, and some of the obstacles he's faced in life, and how his view of failure has changed dramatically over the course of the last 10 years. So it's a great listen. Hope you enjoy it. Daron, how you doing?
Hey, man, I'm great. How about yourself?
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. So why don't you tell my audience a little bit about kind of your practice and what you do?
I am a medical doctor in the state of Arkansas and work primarily at this time as an emergency room physician on the front lines. Previously, hospitalist, nocturnist, intensivist, cross coverage. Not an intensivist, board certified, just cover them at nights as a hospitalist. And then geriatrics, wound care, and family practice have kind of been over the course of my career areas, but primarily emergency medicine.
Gotcha. And I imagine we're talking here beginning of August in 2021. So I imagine that's been kind of busy lately.
Covered up. Yes, sir. It is an opportunity to excel.
So I guess take me through, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on the politics or any of that, but just in regards to what you experience as a human, as well as a doctor, just what you're seeing coming into the emergency rooms just these days, and I guess over the course of the last year.
The last year has definitely been an interesting year compared to the last 20 with obviously COVID, but with things returning to, let's air quotes, normal, for a lot of people now seeing a pandemic kind of superimposed on your normal day-to-day wrecks, heart attacks, strokes, gunshot wounds, stabbings, the assortment of things that normal emergency medicine can bring. Now you have a pandemic on top of that. And so it's volume is certainly an issue. The normal days of what we call dispositioning of patients, whether you're trying to admit them to the hospital or to an ICU or send them home or for an outpatient clinic, wherever they're going, once their emergency visit or encounter has occurred, that has been probably the greatest challenge. And I think you're hearing a lot of the other states kind of starting to see what we're seeing. It was interesting how when the pandemic first broke out, you saw your New York cities and your large metropolitan areas kind of leading the way and kind of being at ground zero here in Arkansas and Mississippi and Alabama and into Missouri and Kansas. We've kind of seen almost a spread out of here throughout the region. And that is giving us quite a challenge with regards to getting people where they need to go for their routine care. So we've seen quite a cacophony of presentations with a superimposed, pandemic on top of normal emergency medicine stuff.
Cacophony, good word. That's hadn't heard that one in a while, but seems to be very apropos. There's another one for you. Another nickel word.
Well played.
But it sounds like you've really, experienced a lot. And, I've known you. I've had I guess I've known you as a human being for 30 plus years.
Yeah. The polyesters.
What's that?
The polyesters.
Yeah. Back in our Foot Locker days in Indian Mall in Jonesboro, Arkansas in the 90s. So
let's go. Anyone
has any pictures, send those in. But I know how challenging the pandemic was for me and continues to be in some regards, but how do you find you're able to handle, first off, I couldn't even imagine being an emergency room doctor, the things that you have to do to detach from scenarios when people come in. So take me through how you usually handle that and how things, if at all, are different for you now.
Thankfully, kind of the emergency medicine part of things and critical care in general prepared me a little bit more so than perhaps some of my colleagues for this type of extreme, I guess is the way that you could try to put that gently. I literally go as hard as I can while I'm there, in this, I used to teach a lot of my residents and interns and physicians that I would train that you have to become very, very comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean,
Hmm.
if you walked in any one regular day in an emergency room across basically North America, you would say, how in the world is this your office? And that is just normal. We really don't know anything any different. But I literally go to the opposite extreme if I'm not at the hospital. If I'm not at the hospital, I am literally unplugged. And so spending time with my fiance and my kids, and, you know, I mean, as you know, I'm an avid gamer. I used to play a lot of ice hockey and, you know, things of that nature. I mean, it's a complete 180 to literally just kind of rest and recharge your batteries and just engulf yourself into whatever you're passionate outside of things. And so for me, that's been an effective strategy over the last 20 something years of just making sure that you have to take care of yourself and recharge your batteries so that you literally are ready, willing, and able to do what you need to do based upon the demands that you can't even predict what's coming. And that's, for me, it's been effective. And so when the pandemic hit, it's been even more so. You know, I had the honor and privilege of working with some amazing minds and surgeons over the years who, you know, always had that mantra, you know, you eat when you can, you rest when you can, you use the bathroom when you can, you have sex when you can, all of those different kind of things where it's like, this is this and this, you know, if you're in an operating room, it's real simple to say, you know, what you're dealing with here.
Yeah.
When you have 7 to 38 rooms full of all of those kind of situations, it's the same is true there. You have to do what you can when you can, but importantly, when you're away from the care setting, you have to take care of yourself and, you know, harvest some enjoyment, meaning, you know, wherever you're at in your journey, whatever's important to you. And so right now with, you know, I've got 3 kids and goodness, they've just turned 12, 14, 16. And so they're at a certain chapter of their life where it's really, really enjoyable, you know, to get to spend time with them. So that's been the blessing is, you know, being away from the hospital.
Yeah.
I just kind of engulf myself in a lot of that as much as I can because I realize those times are fleeting too.
Yeah. So what do you do when you're in those moments with those kids, you know, that to help keep you grounded and, you know, to not worry about like, God, I got to go back to the office tomorrow. Like, what do you do to kind of ground yourself and spend time with them?
I try to create moments with them. And so, you know, but basically any time that they are in, I think I probably stole this from Covey, you know, from the 7 Habits kind of approach where when he talked about letting a kid teach you something that they're passionate about, that has been really, really great for me because being able to let my kids just kind of control that directive so that basically I'm listening to them and really kind of enjoying what they're putting out has been huge. But more importantly, I think you add another layer to that when you allow them to something that they are passionate about, whether it was Pokemon Go or Pokemon cards or, you know, Fortnite or Apex Legends, whatever it is that at that moment they're passionate about. Just kind of being in that space with them so that you really can enjoy your time. And at the same time, the student in me obviously is always learning, you know, from them as well. And then inevitably as a father, you're able to lace in kind of some little advice versus various things, whether it be in a competitive setting or other things. And so that discord with my kids is huge. And then, you know, we'll have the traditional structured events and dinners and those kind of things. But as far as the escapism of that, that's a lot of where I try to put myself and then I also try to make sure that I take some time with each of them because, you know, they're my kids, but each individual one has their own set of ways, and you want to be able to appreciate and love each one of those and kind of give them undevoted time. Same thing with my fiance.
Yeah. You know,
whatever we're doing.
Yeah, I would hate to pretend that I can relate with my 3 dogs because I have to, you know, give each of them attention. But, you know, kids aren't dogs and they're not ducklings, especially. I know me and my brother were 2 years apart. Like kids are, it sounds like yours are 2 years apart each down the line. And that can be a challenge to give each one their own individual attention and not feel like collective dad time versus individual dad time. So I commend you for that. That's impressive.
Appreciate you.
One thing you mentioned, because you did mention Covey, and I know that just from the fact of knowing you for decades and decades, you've been a student of self-improvement for your entire life. I think I might have gotten my first Tony Robbins book from you when I was a teenager, when you kind of introduced me to self-improvement. I want to ask you, I know that you're very developed on self-improvement. How would you rate yourself with self-compassion?
Better than where I was years ago. I mean, decades ago, as kind of a perfectionist competitor, that was not as high on my priority list as it is now. And I would credit my patients with that, having the honor and privilege of in a clinical setting or in an ER or an ICU, wherever that occurs, you start to hear common themes of what's important. And so that was really a good turning point for me as far as that self-compassion, as far as being able to give yourself. At the same time, I don't allow myself to become so self-compassionate that like I forget my role where I am, because sometimes as a physician, I can't speak for everyone else kind of in healthcare, but the profession comes above you. I mean, it is what it is. You're here to help serve others in a scientific capacity. And I don't let that get twisted, but I make sure that when I'm not in that setting that, I am compassionate to myself and understanding where, it's hard, because when you talk about self-improvement, I am a huge fan of everything, which is, oh man, Tony, I've had the honor of meeting him twice. He's a great guy. I love all of his works. There's always something to learn from every bit of it. Covey, all the others that I like to read and just kind of get different points of references. But when they talk about things like, I'll go back to Covey, when you're talking about sharpening the saw and taking care of yourself, I think that you certainly have to incorporate that compassion for yourself, the situation. And I think everyone has an interesting point of reference now with the pandemic, how people chose to cope during those times and how they survived that situation, whether it was mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever was needed at that moment. It might have just been something as simple for 2 straight days to finding toilet paper, whatever that situation was. You have to allow yourself the empathy to have compassion for yourself. And so for me, it started with my patients. It's certainly been reinforced with the quote unquote self-help type of things, but it's always something that I struggle with, because as someone who holds themselves to a certain standard, and a profession that holds you to a certain standard, sometimes you get the scraps, and you have to make sure that if you're living on those physical and emotional scraps, that you have in your to-do list or an area planned where you're going to take time for yourself and others. And for me, that's helped, but it's certainly not, it's a never-ending journey on making sure that you take care of yourself.
Oh, that's great awareness there. So, I know that you've said that you've clearly self-improvement is something that's a value that you hold dear. What would you say that your other most important values are?
Oh man, that's a great question. My most important value, I would say that pleasure and enjoyment have come higher than they used to, because, when you're driven and you're worried about this goal or this directive and these kind of things, it became a very destination driven situation. And enjoying that part of the journey has kind of brought me back to where making sure that you have enjoyment in each thing that you're doing is really, really, really important, because I see a lot of people, they're planning for this thing or the retirement or when they graduate from this or when they have, this point in their career handled or this book. Certainly those objectives are always there, but I saw some of the most amazing people in my life very disillusioned and frustrated. And, from the outside looking in, you would see them and think, man, they've got the world, or, how can they be feeling a certain set of emotions? And for me, it really kind of reprioritized things where, you have to enjoy whatever it is today, this podcast. I mean, it is about enjoying where I am right now in this moment. Yeah. And so, certainly you can reflect on the past. Certainly you can have your tasks prioritized towards your journey in the future. However, if you do not take the time to prioritize this, and so, I've never really thought about it that way, Ramsey, but I really think enjoyment is probably one of the bigger drivers that I would have never even, if I was sitting down making a list of all of the things, But I think that's it. I mean, right now where I'm at, and maybe that's just a reactive, to where we are clinically. But for me, I think it's probably enjoyment.
But from what I'm,
Yeah, yeah.
no, what I'm hearing is though, is that you find enjoyment in everything.
Yes, sir. I think that, and I don't know if that's just age, with the bifocals. I don't know, but I think that has been the thing that probably has helped me the most, because you truly do have to enjoy it. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're working, and sometimes that's a challenge, but it's really not once you get to a certain place where it's just, whatever it is I'm going to do today, I'm going to make the best to enjoy this situation. And more importantly, when you're in a team setting, within disciplines, I really, you and I've played sports and what have you in a similar setting, and even acted in a similar setting. When people say that so-and-so is, quote, good in the locker room, that kind of mantra where within the team setting, you've got to have those people in your life that just find a way to keep it in the middle, right?
Yeah.
So like as a goaltender in ice hockey or a pitcher in baseball, you can never let the highs get too high and you can never get the lows get too low. When I came into healthcare, that became paramount, right? I mean, if somebody just lived or if somebody just died, that's an obvious extreme of situations. And then you've got their families and everything else that you have to consider. You have to be able to keep it in the middle of the proverbial fairway. So tempering that and making it enjoyable for all of the people involved in that situation has kind of become just a way of life for me. And I try to keep that same approach, if you will, whether it be in business, whether it be with my family, whether it be in my personal life, just to try to make it pleasant for everyone involved. And that includes yourself, right? I mean, because you can put the face on for a lot of people. But you have to find that vein where it's just, your harmonic C, where you're in the right space and you're enjoying this. And, like old Jobs said, if you're not doing that however many days in a row, I think he said 5, you got to start reevaluating, what is it that I'm doing? And that's okay. If you're just not in the right place, because you keep trying, you'll find it. But I think enjoyment has become paramount in coping with the current situation for sure.
Yeah, listening to that, it seems to dovetail in nicely with your newfound self-compassion that you're working on, like enjoying every moment, and that includes self-compassion. Like you're kinder to yourself, which allows you to enjoy the moment.
Absolutely.
So everything, one of the things that I talk with my clients about, and my other guests that I have on the show, is everything has a cost. Whether it's good or bad, it costs us something. So what would you say your current lifestyle is costing you?
Time, no doubt. I mean, if you could have your ideal situation where you have allocations of certain time, it's better than it used to be, for sure, because I make sure, and literally my schedule is made for myself professionally a year in advance. I know when I'm going to work, where I'm going to work usually, and how that's going to go down. So then I schedule, my personal time with my fiance, with my kids, and then everything that is not blocked into those situations is my own. And is that where you would want it to be? Well, no, but someone who's 47 years old, I feel pretty good about the balance, where it's at right now as far as the percentages. And that's where kind of when I look to the future, that's what I look to improve. Those percentages at certain durations. Obviously when my kids are, too old to be at this phase where, dad is the same priority. We've all been through that as kids. As they continue to grow, you'll have time for them, but that's where a little bit of that rebate towards self kind of comes in there.
So with that being said, and kind of how you're looking to shift the time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, that's a great question, my friend. I really wish I could have gotten that mantra of enjoyment of the process to myself sooner. I don't know where exactly along the road that became a higher priority, because there were amazing times in there that I thought were just a part of the challenge and the journey that I really didn't take the time to savor and enjoy, no matter how they ended up. It wasn't a very enjoyable time, and it didn't seem like it because I was much more task driven and oriented. When this occurs, then I can feel this or do this. I really would advise myself to enjoy. And I know we've all heard it, right? A million times, a million different ways, but you really, sometimes you just take it for granted. So that would be the thing I would definitely tell myself is find a way to enjoy, whichever, even in the uncertainty, right? I mean, the certainty is, if you're getting a degree, it's not a lot of flexibility. I'm going to do this. I'm going to show up at these classes. I'm going to take these tests, and this is what I'm going to do. So it's very linear, but in the degrees of like uncertainty, like when I went into business and I had no clue what I was doing, but I was learning, from mentors and books and franchises and things of that nature. And when you're in that uncertain time, for me, the certainty and the uncertainty, you've got to find a way to enjoy both sets of those processes almost equally.
So with that being said, then what in life is certain? Don't give me death and taxes.
You took the good ones. Uncertainty.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just because you say, whenever you're facing certainty. So I just kind of wanted it's a matter of perspective. So like, even when you're going to class towards a certain degree in a linear paths that you thought were linear in the past, how linear do they end up to be?
Exactly. I think that's a fantastic thing. And I've not thought about it that way, but yeah, the only certainty that I could come up with is uncertainty. It's just varying degrees of how much uncertainty there is. And so, yeah, I mean, I could make counterexamples for almost everything I can come up with that you could say that would be certainty. So I think that's my new answer. The only thing that's certain is uncertainty.
Impermanence.
I like that. I like impermanence too.
Yeah. The only thing permanent is impermanence.
That's exactly. I mean, I could go with the physicist stuff about energy, but I'm even then, I'm not.
Well, even energy. Yeah, but even the location of energy, like so is energy certain?
Yeah, absolutely. Neither conserved nor it's transference of state, and so I think you almost could bring that into certainty, uncertainty too.
Yeah.
Perhaps the certainty is that that's just like you would say that the energy was neither created nor destroyed. It's just a transference of said energy. I would say the same with certainty and uncertainty. I mean, at this moment, you're certain about certain things. The air conditioner's on, you are taking breaths, your autonomic nervous system is working. I'm certain of all of those things because thankfully you've got your nice video there that I can see. Make sure. But
can you hear my air conditioner, or is it just the fact that it's 111 here and I'd probably be dying if
that was an assumption.
Yeah. So that's the thing is sometimes we mistake observations for certainty.
Absolutely.
And we're like sometimes being certain, like we're observing that right now. Like an observation is a point in time, but will my nervous system be running forever? No, like it's impermanent. So it's not a permanent state. So everything that you've just mentioned is a temporary state.
Oh yeah, I really like what you just said there. From a physics perspective, that's what we call an inertial frame. So if you see a car driving and you take a picture of it at any one moment in time, you can deduce certain things about that car, and its setting and surrounding. However, you don't know if it's about to crash into a wall. You don't know if it's about to take the most beautiful drive in the world. You don't really have the video frames of a bunch of different inertial frames of which you could draw some degree of certainty or try to conclude some certainty. But the only thing that as you start to learn these things long enough, the only thing you know is that you don't know.
And you're also describing every instance you've just described is an instance that's occurred in the past, where when you're talking about certainty, it's a predictor of future. So like when you're looking at what is certain, not what was certain or what happened, it's, this is, if I go to school for these classes, I will get this job. Or if I date this person, we will get married and ride off into the sunset together, happily ever after. Like, nothing is certain, even though we may think it is. Now, hindsight's a whole different ballgame, because even then, Buddhism teaches there are all there are many different viewpoints and each one is wrong. Even the viewpoint that they're all wrong is wrong. So you can't look at, because there's so many different possibilities and perspectives. But like in regards to like certainty, it's future certainty. It's knowing that if I do this, if I save all my life and invest in the stock market, I'm going to retire fine. Well, unless there's a stock market crash, like unless something happens, and like we all think everything's certain, but when things don't go that way, I think the pandemic's a great example. Like we all thought that lives were hunky dory, and then something happens, and the reality was we never had control. It's always just the illusion of control of our own lives.
Absolutely.
Man, how did we get down this rabbit hole? I think I was asking, about uncertainty and certainty. So, you've talked about being a doctor, you've talked about being a fiance, you've talked about being a father. Who is Daron Merryman beneath all those roles?
A kid, for sure, a kid. And I'll fight it forever until the last breath. It's not that I don't age, because I do, certainly, but emotionally, I'm in control of that. I like to be inquisitive. I like to learn new things. I like to have a great time. And so some of that, I'll get around people my age or older, and I just go, my goodness, what? Sometimes I just might not belong. And empathetically, I can listen for a long, long time. So below the surface, still very much a kid at heart. I like a lot of the characteristics you would attribute to a child, I guess. Yeah. Guilty.
So it sounds like those would be important values as well. Like, curiosity. So, that's, I know. And what's that?
And I just curious. I just love to learn. I was that pesky kid that always likes to know why. So whether it was, the whole physics thing, I guess is why. And then how the human body works is just, why does this treatment work? So it's annoying to the teacher, but for a never ending student.
It's funny. I know we had the same, one of the same teachers in high school who's also our football coach. And I was the kid in class who would ask in history class, like he would talk about how, the reason that humans are considered civilized is because we have divisions of labor and assigned tasks. And I remember raising my hand and be like, well, what about bees? And then the teacher, Coach Ewart, stopped the class and wouldn't start until he looked up the answer to tell me why bees weren't considered civilized. Because I was that annoying kid also, thirsty for knowledge, just want to know what the hell, just let's look at it from a different way.
And seeing it great though, that, just like Coach Ewart, that was way before Google, right?
Oh yeah.
But he would go look up that answer and give it to you. And so, seriously, I was blessed with a lot of very tolerant, empathetic teachers along the way. So yeah, you're right. The why.
And there's I know we're both fans of Dr. Z-Dog online. He did an interview with another doctor about awakening. And he had a great quote. He says, when childhood dies, their corpses become adults.
Oh,
and
that's good.
Because we lose that inquisitive nature. Like, if you ask a kid if he's playing, he's not like, well, because I need my exercise. Like, I just like it. I enjoy playing. And we lose that as an adult because we get assigned. It's kind of where I was going with who are we beneath all these roles, all these labels that we get slapped on us along the way, we allow to become us, and we lose sense of who we are beneath them. So it's nice to hear that you still have that inquisitive childlike curiosity.
Yeah, I can't really take credit in it. I think just the nature of having exposure to this many people undergoing this thing called life, I've just picked up bits and pieces along the way. It wasn't really something I just sat down and thought, I'm just going to be a kid forever. No, I found the people that aged the way I wanted to age, I guess modeling, if you will.
Yeah.
And you kind of see what they do, and you see what effectively. So there's what we in data would call a selection bias, right? I'm not studying all of the other people who might not have the characteristics I wouldn't want, and all of them display this curiosity and playfulness that is just infective. It really, really is infectious as to how you approach them and interact with them, and you just literally want more time with them because they're a lot of fun.
It sounds like you found your tribe is what it sounds like.
Yeah. And ever trying to expand, you know what I mean? Where it's it's not just like-minded social media echo chambers. I kind of feel sorry for people that have limited themselves to where they are in their present state with whatever it is that whether it be politics, whether it be COVID, whether it be whatever is in the next chapter, where they can come up with a belief system and, kind of resonate with themselves. That certainly is one way to deal with things. But I think much like driving through McDonald's, it may give you what you want right then, but there are some lasting effects from that. So, yeah.
What do you think, other than, because you've mentioned time and you've mentioned work, what do you think, other than those things, is holding you back from the life you want to live right now?
I would say failure. And I don't.
What do you define as failure?
That's a great question. So let me go with the first one. How did you ask it the first time? What is holding me back?
What do you think is holding you back from living the life you want?
Right now, okay, so starting in 2008 through about 2014, 15, 16, at various stages in there, I had started a number of different businesses, 4, 5, 6, 7 different companies. And we did a lot of things right, a lot of things wrong. We had some real estate holding companies. We had some home healthcare companies, that took care of seniors and staff nurses and doctors and nurse practitioners and stuff. And we had aesthetics clinics and primary care clinics. And then I was still trying to practice. And a couple of them did not do well. And we did everything we could to try to make sure that those things stayed afloat, because we had basically at that time like 208 employees. And so, and their families. So we did everything we could to make that survive. And that was an incredible debt situation that ended up resulting in a $14 million bankruptcy. It was hugely challenging, I think is the kindest way to put it. But that failure had a lot of negative ramifications for a lot of people. And that was tough. So there was the emotions of all of that. But even as you start to rise above that and make sense of it and all of those things, there's still reaching effects. So for example, like IRS audits on years that you went broke, hiring, lawyers and stuff to represent you so that you can try to get a fresh start. That process is not a fast process. Matter of fact, mine's still ongoing. And, my quote unquote failure from the bankruptcy had long closed long ago. So even if tomorrow I wanted to go scratch off a lottery ticket, right, and try to form some new way of investing, this, that, or the other, there are certain things logistically that kind of hold that back until I can get a stamp of approval of all right, here's your clean start. You can move forward. And so, maybe that helped me, with enjoyment, because again, as a driven person, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who wants to do this, that, or the other, and I like creating jobs and everything else, it may have protected me from myself. Right. I mean, if I would have started name your company or your service provider during the middle of a pandemic, I know how that story goes. That's the reason why I feel so sad for so many small businesses right now who are truly struggling. It's just so tough. And so back to failure, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that was something that gave me some interesting perspective. I used to have a traditional way of defining failure, which was, basically the outcome, right? I mean, you win or lose the game. If you lost the game and you didn't become independently, wealthy or have X amount of, companies last for 20, 30 years, well, then obviously that failed, right? By all measures. And I had to, and I'll credit my boy Tony with that. I had to define what failure was for me.
Yeah.
Because I had seen, people around me, quote unquote, fail. And for me, the only failure was if I literally didn't do everything I could to make sure that they survived. And, and it was easy for me to figure that out in medicine. But in business, I didn't give myself the same professional latitude. It was win at all costs. Failure is not an option, and that mantra hurt me. and others that I cared about tremendously.
Mm.
And so I had to really look at that from a different prism with that experience of, I can't do all these things. It was easy when it used to be me, right?
Yeah.
If I show up, if I go to my job, if I go do the work, if I go find a way, that's an easy.
But then when you have other people's bread on the table,
Yes, when basically everything you or your company or enterprise is doing is dependent upon the works, beliefs, and everything else of others, it's hard to deliver on that promise. So integrity, which I hold at a very, very high standard, it's tough when some things you say and do are completely dependent upon factors outside of yourself. And that's always the case to a degree. But the more out of, let's air quote, control that is, where you literally can't just reel it in, and that's tough. And so I had to rework how I saw failure, because otherwise you can be very, very difficult on yourself.
Well, that's one of the things that, I try to work with my clients on is looking at mastery versus goal orientation, mastery versus outcome. And it's something that I struggle with, which is why the book that I'm writing is called Chasing the Rabbit, Why Achieving Success is Never Enough. Because, you cross the finish line of an Ironman. Okay, well, what now? It's like, it was always feeling empty because the goal was never really the goal. And it's because I wasn't mastering the process of it. And even if I failed and didn't get the goal, not looking at it as what did I learn? What could I do differently? Which is different because it's not goal oriented. If you want to sit there and keep making, doing what you're doing because it's successful, pull out your BlackBerry and take some notes and, see how well that works for you. Yeah. So it's adapting and what can you learn versus just looking at that bottom line.
Absolutely. And so to your point, like when I talk about business and failure in business, the thing that I learned way too late is, number one, no one in their right mind should start a business, continue a business, or, fight the failure of a business with debt, right? There are other ways you can go about that can be more effective, because the mistake that I made was I was a personal guarantor of all of them. So even if 6 or 7 of them are doing fantastic, but 2 of them need to close because they're not doing well by all measures.
They're not the anchor for the other 6, huh?
It can't be the other 6, but if they all have to rise or sink together, that's an incredible challenge. And at the time I was just, you don't know what you don't know. And when you're a guarantor of everything. And so I made a huge mistake right there at the foundation. That was a foundational issue that literally my companies and I could not survive. And so, but so there's the analysis of those kind of situations, and then there's everything else.
Well, but listening to your acceptance, and I think, just listening to you talk, it makes sense now why you've learned to find joy in the little things and enjoyment in life and the self-compassion, because you have a different prism that you're looking at everything through.
Absolutely.
And allowing yourself to be human and having made those mistakes and learning from them. So that's, it's been just listening to you. I've again, known you for over 3 decades, but you're an incredible human being, brother. And thank you for sharing. And before we end, if you were to have one piece of advice that you were to give someone who feels like they're not, let's say you want to give someone advice who doesn't find the enjoyment in life, what would you tell them to help them find enjoyment in the moment?
Enjoyment in the moment. First of all, be observant. You know what I mean? Because if you're let's back to your picture analogy. If I take a picture of where you're at right now, and let's say 78% of what they're seeing is not what they're wanting to see, or it's eliciting a certain emotion, you have control over your field of view, right? So if you widen out another, 10%, you may see the one thing that brings you the most joy. If in this cacophony of a picture, there is one thing that I see on there, 1% of it that I like or could perceive enjoyment from, that's where you must put your focus. Now, as you start to get in a better situation, you can start to find other parts within that picture that you might start to like. So say, for example, if I had however many pictures of myself on my wall back behind me, and you're
hypothetically speaking, of course.
Hypothetically speaking, if I'm looking back there and those are the 2 to 3 things that I like, But then at that moment, I see the achievement of that Ironman. And I remember the doubt that I had that could ever be achieved. You start to build upon the thing that you already have the emotion that you want, right?
Yeah.
So you're layering on top of that. So if that's to laugh in a setting that is not laughable, right? Might not even be the time or the place.
Yeah.
But if your goal is to find enjoyment in places where you cannot find enjoyment, you have to start and build on the thing you hear, see, believe, and then layer outward from there. And then eventually, if you layer the whole picture, you'll see that the entire thing, even the initial 78%, which you saw as unpleasant, there's something beautiful in that too. That would be how
That's awesome.
I have learned to do it in the ER, at least.
Awesome. Now, only because you're pointing out the pictures behind me, this might not play well for the podcast, but maybe I'll put a picture of it up. I'm going to show you what's on the other wall over here, which is a 6-foot picture of me that was sent to me whenever I was a spokesperson for EAS Sports Nutrition. And it can't hang anywhere else in the house, but I feel way too vain to have it hanging behind me. So I stare at it. So that's just so, you know.
I'm not trying to pick on you, brother. I'm just trying.
No, I found it funny.
As I literally was sitting there looking at your pictures on the back wall, I was trying to find different aspects of things.
Well, but like over here on this side, on the wide view, I've got my control what you can thing over here above the bookshelf.
Yeah.
You know.
Sorry, it was the picture metaphor, and then with all the pictures, I had to.
It's all good. That's why, you know, I love your sense of humor, and I think that's why we've gotten along all these years. Is we're both just old children, and that's what I tell people. When you turn 18, a bolt of lightning doesn't hit you and make you an adult. We're all just old children, and it's nice to remember that sometimes. So I appreciate you, and thank you for coming on here and your honesty and your vulnerability. And hopefully, if anyone in the medical community hears this, they can. Learn something, and maybe everyone else can too. So thanks, Daron. And I'll see you on Call of Duty sometime soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely, brother. I appreciate you having me. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.